Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. Welcome to Value Selling Associates' first complimentary webinar of 2018. Glad you could all join us. My name is Julie Thomas, and I am going to be talking for the next 45 minutes or so about gaining access to executives. We are going to talk about a number of, I think, common sense strategies that are not always common practice. So I look forward to sharing some insight with you and answering any questions you might have along the way. We will be answering questions at the end of the session, so please, if you have any questions or comments, share them in your GoToWebinar session, your taskbar there. I will also be recording today's session, so for any of you that are joining us being recording, welcome as well. Or if you want to share this with any of your colleagues, you'll have access to the recording at the end of today's session. I'll show you exactly where you can find it. You know, the interesting thing about selling to executives is for many of us, we know how important it is. And I'll talk a little bit about the foundation of that. But according to a Sales Benchmark Index recent study, 58% of all opportunities result in no decision being made by the buyer. In other words, you don't lose it to the competitor, you lose it to status quo and the fact that we're not going to change at all. And one of the key root causes of that is that we are not gaining access and talking to the executives. And when we are selling change, which many of us are selling change, that truly becomes an executive business decision for the types of changes that you're trying to sell. So without access to the executives, we are much more likely to end up in a dead-end sales cycle that goes nowhere. As we get into this, we're going to really talk about some specific premises associated with value selling and that we believe is true. But first and foremost, we fundamentally believe that to sell to an executive, you must become an executive yourself. You must think like an executive. You must communicate like an executive, and that communication is concise and compelling and adds value to them. And you must give them a reason to talk with you, not share your reason to talk to them. And we'll get into a little bit about how we can do that. As we think about executive access, we know that not everything will work with every person every time. So part of the reason for having a number of different strategies is so that for your situations, you can go at executive access in a multitude of different ways. Because without that prior knowledge of a specific individual, there's no way for you to know what is the best way to communicate with them. So let's start this out before we get into this. And I've got a little poll that I'd like to share with everyone. So let me launch this poll for us right now. But I want to hear from you. What is the most difficult part of executive access? We hear from all of our clients that sometimes it's just figuring out who I need to speak with. And if I'm told that I need to speak with someone, am I validating that? How many of us find out at the end of the sales cycle that the person we thought could make the decision was not actually the right person and we were targeting the wrong executive all along? Is it just getting the appointment in the first place? Or is it, once I get that appointment, maintaining that relationship and getting back in the second, third, fourth time to move this down? And I appreciate all of you kind of sharing where you think the hardest part is. If you've selected other, and a few of you have, please share that in your chat so I kind of have some insight as to what other means for you. Well, let's take another couple of seconds and go ahead, and I'm going to close this poll and share the results with you. So very interesting. Almost 2/3 of you, 59% of you are describing that the biggest challenge you have is actually getting that appointment. We're going to talk quite a bit about that today. And interestingly enough, that 60% is 3 times more than the next closest option, which is getting the second appointment. So they're kind of really related there, where about a quarter of us are wrestling with who do we talk to and how do we know that they're really the right person. So we're going to spend the bulk of our time talking about how do we get that appointment in the first place, and why would an executive ever want to even meet with us in the first place. So let's dive into our session today. We're going to set the stage here, and probably going to share with you some things that we all know to be true. But, what has changed in selling today's world? It is different. No matter what you're selling, today's world is different. The buyers are different. Their expectations are different. How they consume information is different, etc. We all know that we need to sell to executives, but let's kind of revisit exactly why it is so important to get into that executive suite for most of the types of things that you're selling. And the sooner we get there, often the better off we are. We're going to talk about how we find them, where we find them, and then what we can do in terms of 4 specific different strategies. Again, I think common sense, but often not common practice to go at that. We know that the number one reason that sales cycles result in a dead end and the prospect does nothing is because we are ultimately selling to someone who can't buy or won't buy for whatever reason. But let's focus on the can't buy. I spent some time talking this morning with a candidate, and he talked about his strategy in order to make sure that I am only taking no from the person that can ultimately say yes. And if I am taking no from a person who can't say yes, I am not talking to the right person. And we know that that's key. However, we also know that people who can't buy can consume a lot of time and energy. They can actually give us a false sense of security that we're productive because they'll keep us very, very busy. And the interesting thing about selling to people who can't buy is often we have to include them in the process today in order to build consensus that we are the right change and the right solution. The risk that we run as a salesperson is acknowledging that we have to sell to people that can't buy to build that consensus, but ignoring the fact that we also need to make sure that the person who can buy is involved with us in that decision. So it's an interesting challenge that we have. The world that we're dealing with has changed. Social media, social networking, social referrals, how people research us, how we research them has changed. The number of people involved in business decisions has changed. Change in and of itself is a business decision, and business decisions are made by business decision makers and executives, not by the technical users. They may have input, but they're not ultimately typically the business decisions. Buyers are barraged. In my own world, I probably get no less than 40 unsolicited emails a day. Some of them are interesting. Some of them are completely irrelevant to my business, but needless to say, they come anyways, and we'll talk about that. So if our buyers are barraged by unsolicited requests for their time, how do they decide which one merits a conversation? How did they decide why they would spend some time and respond? And the gatekeepers are abundant. Whether they're people or technology, we've got people in place and technology in place to keep us from some of those unsolicited messages and protect the precious resource that we have of time. So that's all there. But at the end of the day, we still have to do it anyways. We still have to do what we need to do to get the attention and have meetings. We know that the number one success criteria for sales executives today is still how many meetings are they able to successfully complete with potential buyers. There's no way around that. The more meetings we have, the higher the likelihood is we're going to find those individuals that we can create opportunities with. So that means we need to have a number of different strategies. Because prospects are doing their own research, we need to be top of mind when they're ready to buy. We need to have relevant messaging that gives them a compelling reason to drop what they're doing and think about what we might have to share with them or offer them. We need to add value to every individual that we encounter every time we ask for a meeting. And value is customer, both company and individual specific. And so in order to add value, we need to know a little bit about these people. And more, our strategy has to be not just identify a person in a company to access, but identify a multitude of individuals in a company to access, and go at that with a multi-pronged, multi-individual approach. And when we do that, we start out these processes with mitigating the risk that we have a single point of failure or a single person who can become a bottleneck throughout our entire process. So first, and I'll go quickly through this because most of you did not articulate that finding them, validating them, identifying was an issue. But we do definitely need to identify, who do we want to talk to? Who is that ideal prospect? What is their company? What are their situations? What are their circumstances? Who are the roles that we're trying to target? And what do those people care about? We want to identify that. Ideally, if you cannot concisely identify who your target buyer is, you are probably not targeting with specificity those buyers that you should be talking to. So go through that exercise. The other thing that I think is really key is we know that we don't always have the opportunity to start at the ultimate executive decision maker. That's okay. But we have to be transparent and honest with ourselves and know when we're not there so that we can create a strategy to mitigate the risk that we're going to end up in a dead end sales cycle. Often when I'm talking to sales reps, I hear things like this. Well, I've got a great relationship with Joe, and he's a middle manager, and I know that he isn't the only person involved in the decision. He might make the decision, but he actually can't spend the dollars. Somebody else has to spend the dollars. And I'm not going to try to get to that person because I don't want to offend Joe. Or Joe has told me that don't worry, he can get it done. The reality is Joe might be able to get it done. And Joe might not be able to get it done. So your job as a sales rep is not to determine whether or not to trust Joe and predict his clout and influence in the organization with the other executive decision makers. Your job is to mitigate your risk and acknowledge when you have a risk and find ways to mitigate it. And at the end of the day, when you are selling change, you are selling your ability to add incremental value to a business by addressing business needs, business issues, and business problems with whatever your solution is. So your entree to an executive is not how sexy your product is and how much sizzle is on the steak. Your entree to the executive is what matters to them and their business and what you can do. You know, there's a great analogy that we hear a lot in sales that says, we are not selling the drill. We are selling the hole in the wall. Yet many of us as sales reps, because we are so excited about how cool our drill is, want to talk about the drill. The customer doesn't care about the drill. The customer cares if they need a hole in the wall. And we need to focus on the messaging around to do that. So as you think about how we're going to gain access, the first thing you need to think about, why would they want to talk to you in the first place? What's in it for them? Why would they drop what they're doing, move things around, respond, take action to your messaging, however your messaging gets to them, and we'll talk about that. And what would be in it for them to have that meeting? So many of the communications that I see are not customer or prospect focused. It's all about the rep and their wants and their needs and their products. And so we need to think about how we can use that messaging different. So we're going to talk specifically about 4 specific different ways to gain access. We're going to talk about referrals and introductions and get a little bit specific on how to do that and how to maximize that. We are going to talk about gatekeepers and how to turn our gatekeepers into bridge builders to help us get in the door, not keep us from getting in the door. We're going to talk a little about bargaining and negotiation for access, and then we're going to talk about A.I.M, which we consider to be an orchestrated approach and communication strategy to gain access to individuals that we don't currently have a relationship with or anyone who can pave the way for us through a referral or an introduction. So let's talk about referrals. Today, there is a multitude of research studies that say the executives in various roles and positions are more likely to take a meeting when the request from that meeting or the recommendation for that meeting comes from someone that they know and trust. And that someone that they know and trust could be within their company or it could be with outside of their company. But it's typically somebody that they know and trust that is somewhat of a peer. I know in my world, I take meetings when people that I know and trust say, Julie, you really need to meet this person and you need to hear what they're doing. And this is why. Or people that I work with, whether it's my customers, my suppliers, my former colleagues, are bringing them to me and telling me the value that meeting, that conversation will add to me. I will take that meeting. So the question is, who do you know that knows them? The beauty of social networking now is that we can see who knows everybody. And kind of that whole 6 degrees of separation, there are often people that we're connected to that can get us to other people. So not only are we looking for referrals, we're more importantly, in my opinion, looking for introductions. And we're looking for those because that is a great way to get in the door when that is paved by somebody who's credible from that perspective. So think about, who do you know? Who have you worked with in the past? Who do you know? Who do your colleagues know that you might be able to leverage those relationships? Leverage your social networking tools. According to Salesforce.com, 64% of executives regularly are looking at LinkedIn. 64% of executives are regularly looking at LinkedIn, according to Salesforce.com. So can you reach out in that social network? Can you leverage the community and the content that you're sharing and leveraging and that they're sharing and leveraging to gain access and get referrals from that perspective? But really focus on that. That will be, when you can find those introductions, the best way to get that initial meeting. The next strategy is we need to figure out how to get around the gatekeepers. We all are stuck with them. They exist in every business, every company. Even in small businesses, either there's a technology gatekeeper or it could be an administrative gatekeeper, or it could be a middle manager gatekeeper. Maybe we get in at the first level and then find out that that person is going to become a complete roadblock for us and bar us, or at least tell us they're barring us from access to anybody else. So it goes without saying, if we're dealing with a human gatekeeper, an administrative assistant, a receptionist, anybody who might have the role of protecting an executive from people like us, we want to treat them with respect. Because the reality is, if we win them over, we have a higher likelihood of getting their support and understanding how we can do that. I always use the tactic of asking them for help and not being evasive or try to trick them into patching me through. I know here in my office, there's a number of people that will get to my operations director, who also kind of serves as an executive assistant with me, and people literally try to trick her into getting me on the phone with them. And it always is amazing to me in today's world of really trying to create trust-based relationships that someone wants to start that with trickery and dishonest and that perspective. I just don't think that in the long run that's going to be successful for building a lasting relationship with a client. It might get you that first meeting, but it will, I believe, in the long run, damage your credibility. So ask for their help. Be very honest with them about why you're calling, because the reality is they have insight to what's top of mind for that executive. They may be able to give you insight that you could use to better shape your messaging. They may know exactly what that executive is thinking about. A few years ago, one of our associates was cold calling and doing a campaign into a specific industry, and she was going through this kind of A.I.M strategy that we'll talk about, this orchestrated communication strategy, and she was sending letters, physical letters, U.S. Postal Service. Remember them? They actually do still deliver mail. And following that up with electronic communication, emails, etc. And then surrounding that with picking up the phone and calling clients. And she picked up the phone and called this client. And the executive assistant for the person she was trying to target picked up the phone. And our associate went on to explain, when the executive assistant asked, why are you calling? She explained exactly why she was calling. I'm following up. I sent him a book. We work with companies just like yours to help them improve sales productivity. The administrative assistant immediately put her on hold, said, just one moment, and went into the executive's office and said, I think there's someone on the phone that you should talk to. Bottom line, Marilyn, our associate, got the appointment. From the appointment, got the sales call, actually got the guy on the phone right there. From that, got an appointment. From the appointment, got a contract, and had a wonderful relationship with this company. In the debrief of that, she asked the executive assistant, what did I say that led you to patch me through to that executive when we spoke? And she said, well, when you told me why you were calling, just an hour before that meeting, I was in the executive staff meeting, and I take notes at the executive staff meeting. And the executive that I patched you through in that meeting 1 hour before was given the task to find a sales trainer to come and support us at our upcoming all-company meeting. The administrative assistant knew that this was top of mind, knew that they were going to start to do some research, and we called it that. Now, we can't predict timing, but what we can be predictive of is how good we are at concisely communicating what we do, so that when we ask for help of who should I be talking to, we are in a better position to go through. The more we do it, the luckier we get. The busier we are and the more successful we are at that concise communication, the more success we're going to have. We also have the gatekeeper, that's the middle manager. And those are the individuals that we end up starting a sales cycle with, or we may end up discussing an opportunity with. We know they're not the ultimate decision making person, but maybe they are critical in the evaluation process. Maybe they are a key stakeholder in the use of what we're selling, although not the person who's going to ultimately be able to execute on that decision. We want to really understand what their motivation is. Oftentimes they're afraid. They're afraid of losing credibility. They're afraid we're going to embarrass them somehow. They're afraid we're going to say something that makes them look bad. They're afraid that they're going to lose their stature and their respect in the organization. But how can we partner with them to understand what their motivation is and partner with them? We know that everybody's motivated for something. And if they're motivated to keep us from an executive, how can we understand what the root cause of that motivation is and get it working for us? We want to partner with them, and we're going to talk about different ways to bargain and negotiate with them. But we also want to set expectations early. One of the key tactics that we talk about in value selling framework workshops is the whole concept of modus operandi and setting the expectation early and reinforcing it often, that in order for us to be successful together, we need to identify and involve all of the key stakeholders. And that doesn't mean, hey, you're not important, I need to go talk to somebody else. It means that together we're all on the same page in achieving the value that you want to achieve. And if we're going to be all on the same page, we all need to be in open communication and understand where we're going. I'm often asked, hey, Julie, here's the situation. I've been talking to this guy, Bob, and I really need to get to Sue and this client, and he's telling me no, 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 no. Do I go around? And, do I end zone them? Do I just ignore what Bob has said and go to Sue? And the reality is there's no right or wrong answer to that. It depends. There are times when we absolutely want to go around. Maybe you feel like we're starting to lose. Maybe it becomes clear that Sue, the ultimate executive decision maker that we're trying to get to, has a relationship with a competitive alternative. It has other people have access to her, and we're different. There may be times to do that. But any time that we make that decision to go around, we have to anticipate and mitigate what those unintended consequences of that action could be. Remember, there's a law in physics that says every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It's a law. It's a law of physics. So every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So we want to understand what that potential reaction could be, and if we expect that it could be unintended and hurt us, again, we want to mitigate those. But those are situational decisions that need to be made on a situational basis and really kind of go through the pros and the cons and the scenarios that could come of that. And then we talk about the technology gatekeeper. I mean, today the reality is the biggest challenge that we have with email is, did it actually get to the person to begin with? Did a spam filter weed it out? Did somebody else weed it out? Did it go to their junk file and they never see it? Are we not a recognized domain that comes in with that URL? So the biggest challenge, quite frankly, with all communication, but certainly with email communication, is just because we sent it doesn't mean it was received. So, but how do we use email, get around email? And part of that is a multi-pronged approach. The phone is not dead. The phone is still a communication tool that is used by a number of people. Now, voicemail is a technology barrier to the phone, as might be caller ID. But the phone is still a useful tool and should not be completely ignored. And we'll talk about how you use that and what do you do. How do you use the phone? What do you say when you get to voicemail? What are the best practices for that? And then we can, there's other technology, lower tech gatekeepers, and that if you send them U.S. Postal Service, do they see it? Are they ever in the office? Do you get it to the right place? With more and more virtual office spaces, and does anybody even have a fax machine anymore? I just had a client who moved offices, and they told me they're not even using fax technology anymore. But it's still there, and we need to understand that. So one of the things that we want to do with the middle manager, as I mentioned, is bargain for access. This is the whole concept of give to get. And certainly if we can identify that we don't have access to the executive decision maker or all of the decision makers we can use, giving to get access could be a key way to do that. One of the top things that I see our clients use in this give to get negotiation is what one of my clients calls top to top access. If I cannot get access to your senior vice president of sales, can I use someone with an equivalent role or title in my organization and use them as the reason to put together that meeting? Top to top, can I negotiate that my executive, who's a peer of their executive, can bridge that middle ground? But often we want to be thinking about every time someone asks us for something, what are we going to get if we give? And thinking through what we need to more deliberately qualify our opportunity and vet whether or not it's real is what we want to think about that we're asking for. So if they're asking for a demo, if they're asking for a reference, if they're asking for a pilot, if they're asking for a visit, if they're asking for a lot of things, what can you give? Or when you think of what you're going to give them, what can you get in return that will help you shorten that sales cycle? And if it's executive access, think through how you can involve them in that. How can that ask be? If then are the great ways to position that executive. And if they're not asking for something, we can still do that if then with that top to top approach. So let's talk about the A.I.M campaign. The A.I.M campaign is really an orchestrated, specific communication process to go at people that we don't have introductions to, we haven't already met, but we are trying to engage. And we want to think about how we can create a relevant message to the individuals that we're targeting that have the ability to evoke an emotional response. And so when we talk about what it takes to evoke an emotional response, we talk about the 3 levers that we try to include in these messages. One would be anxiety. What could be going wrong? What could they be missing? What could you teach them or share with them that could make a difference in their business performance and results? Who do you already work with that might influence them? Who can we name drop? Who have we worked with that might influence them and say, wow, that's a great company. If they did it, maybe it's something I should consider. That is a great executive. If his thought leadership believes that this is a good solution, then maybe it's something that I should at least explore or learn about. And then motivation, the old what's in it for me. What is the value that you can add to either the individual or the company? And in most cases, we'd like it to be both. It's why content marketing is so important. We want to give them a reason to engage. And unfortunately, that reason is not you want to talk to them about your products on your timeline, etc. It's interesting. I'm seeing a lot of emails that are cold calls that then are asking the executive to click on a link and schedule the time with the salesperson. I haven't seen any data on is that working, but I don't think I'm going to take the time to fit to your schedule. If I decide that I want to engage, I'm going to ask you to fit to mine. So it's kind of an interesting approach. We'll see how the research comes out on that. But we really want to focus this on the customer. So what does that mean? In order to launch an AIM campaign, we got to know who we're calling about. We got to know who we're calling to. These messages are customer specific. This is not a template that goes to 50 people with the same thing. If we're reaching out to an individual, we need to use their name spelled correctly in that message. We need to use their company name spelled correctly in that message. And we need to focus on outcomes. The hole in the wall, not the drill. We also need to focus on bottom line. Business executives are bottom line. At the end of the day, they don't care about your product. They really don't. They care about what your product does for them. So you don't want to talk to them about your product. As a matter of fact, that's one of the number one reasons executives will not talk to a sales rep the second time. They tell us it's because they didn't know my business and they came in and they just wanted to pitch product. They had an agenda, and their agenda was focused on them, not me. And if I don't think you're here to help me, why do I care if you can deliver a pitch? Why do I care what your product does if your product is irrelevant? You also want those messages to be authoritative and credible. You want to have confidence. Our messaging has to have confidence of what we're doing and take a point of view to be authoritative as a subject matter expertise in the type of value that you can add. And that message is about them, not you. And if it's about them, you've got to know them. You've got to do enough research to craft these messages so that they're relevant and they resonate. And then go beyond that to make sure that they are concise and compelling and clear and grammatically correct and all of those types of things. When we pull this AIM campaign and do this research, then this becomes our messaging that we can use when we're trying to get them on the phone, if we do choose to leave voicemails, if we are sending emails, if we're sending in-mails via LinkedIn, if we're sending private messages through groups in LinkedIn, we can go at these in a multi-pronged approach with these core messages. So now let's talk a little bit. Let's assume we've gotten in, and let's talk about how we make sure that we get back there. And at the end of the day, our goal is to get in the door, but then it's to build a relationship and have a business conversation. We're not there to pitch. We're not there to show up with the 75-page beautiful PowerPoint slide deck that we've got to get through in the 30 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever we have with that executive. So we want to engage, gain interest, and be provocative in the sense that we're not challenging their insight, but add value with insight that intrigues them so they want to learn more. So how do we do that? Well, we don't talk too much. We certainly don't focus on our product. Kind of some basics of, don't interrupt, listen, and don't forget to do our research. But be prepared to add value. One of our associates has coined the term value-added interruption. Every prospecting attempt and outreach to get a meeting has to be a value-added interruption. We know for sure it's an interruption. Wouldn't it be great if all of our target buyers were just sitting around in their office, waiting for their phone to ring, waiting for their email to ding or a text to pop up with somebody they've never met, know nothing about, so that they could have something to do that day? It doesn't work that way. The higher you go, the busier they are, and the less patience they have to focus on you for them. So you want to be prepared to address them. One of the best ways to address them is through storytelling, and we have a whole series of trainings that talk about credibility, and I'll also address that in a minute. So here's a template of an interesting AIM letter that worked. And I'm just going to show this out in a couple of things. This email was successful in getting a meeting that ultimately resulted in a deal. So if you think about that AIM uh, methodology, it did a few things. First of all, it targeted multiple people simultaneously in the company. Now, it wasn't this one email that went to John, Alan, Matt, and Lindsay. It was 4 different emails that told each of them they were also calling out to the individuals. Now, John, Alan, Matt, and Lindsay, 2 of them were peers, and 2 of them were higher executives. So the strategy was, let me go at multiple people in this organization. Let me let Matt and Lindsay know that I'm also going to their boss, and let John know that I'm also going to his other executive peer. We had a strong call to action in there, and they gave them very specific metrics of how they could add value to that salesperson. This particular email actually got a response via email from 2 out of the 4 participants within an hour. Now, luckily, those individuals were sitting at their desks and the timing was right, but the message was compelling and it worked. So one of the strategies of executive access is don't only target one executive. Think about who else you can be targeting. This letter, I think, did a great job of demonstrating some credibility. Talked about industry, told a little bit of a story about previous results that we'd had, and helped establish the why, was compelling into why they would want to meet as opposed to why we wanted to pitch. Nowhere did it say what the value selling product was. Nowhere did it say what any deliverable was or anything that we do. It talked only about the results that we've brought to similar companies, and are you interested in improving your sales productivity? And it did that through stories. So it was concise and it was compelling, and the good news is in that situation it worked. So gaining access is important, and we're going to open it up to questions in a minute and look forward to that. But let me just kind of share. We know that the most successful sales executives have effective meetings with the right people. And in order to have effective meetings with the right people, we have to have business acumen. We have to think like an executive. We have to communicate like an executive. And we have to be bottom line results oriented and focus on the results, not the product. You would never go buy a car by reading the instruction manual for the car. Executives that we're selling to aren't going to buy the product by going through a product presentation. They want to focus on the experience of the product and the results of the product. At some point, obviously, I want to know the nits and the gnats of the technology, but that's not where I want to start. Successful tactics that we've talked about is whenever possible, leverage an introduction. An introduction is better than a referral, but a referral is plan B if you can't get the introduction. And the introduction might be, hey, can we go have coffee with that person together? What can we do to really get face-to-face and a handoff as opposed to just, hey, Joe said I could call you. Be prepared and have a gatekeeper strategy. We know that they're out there. We know we're going to run into them. So let's be proactive in mitigating that. Have a message for them. Develop trust and relationship with those individuals so they're working with you and not against you. Modus operandi of setting those expectations early and often that without full stakeholder engagement, we're likely to be unsuccessful together. Giving to get and bargaining for access, often with an executive to an executive access. And then when we get to that pure cold calling where we've got to go in campaign, think about your messaging in the context of AIM. Results-oriented communication that triggers an emotional response are more likely to get a response than someone who sends you an email and asks to talk about a product. So let me open it up to questions, and then and happy to share that. And so glad that so many of you joined us today. This was it's the first webinar of the year, and I congratulate all of you for taking time out of what is always a busy time of the year, kicking off the fiscal year, to invest in yourself, your own skill sets, and taking some of this common sense and turning it into common practice. So looking here at the questions, let's see. I've got one. What books do you suggest that we read on prospecting? There are a ton of books out there on sales. I think if you just go into Amazon.com and look at the top selling books, there's a new book coming out every day. The value, my book, Value Selling, Driving Sales Up, one conversation at a time, is a sales engagement book that also touches on some of the concepts that we've touched on, and we also have a number of resources on our website. So let me look at some of the other questions. Let's see. What do you do if your first calls are at the technical level? How do you expand from technical to business? Well, that is a challenge for many of us and many of our clients who are selling a technical solution. And technical doesn't necessarily need to mean information technology. I have clients that are selling engineering products or manufacturing core products, and their product itself is very, very technical and for their buyers, and they want to get out of the commodity technical conversation to the business conversation. I think if you're already stuck there with a gatekeeper, you've got to find ways to bridge and go at that executive business speaker, business decision maker. I think networking, direct marketing, and messaging to those executives, as well as sales campaigns to them, can be successful. The interesting thing that I ask a lot of the companies that I work with to look at, if you want to have business conversations with people, what is the content and the messaging that you're providing them? If it's all technical and product oriented, you can't use that to get that executive meeting. So what can you do to create content and tell stories that compel an executive to engage? So you might also want to look at your content. Do you have the right content and messaging to go at them as specifically as possible? So let me share with you some additional information. A number of the questions are, is this being recorded? And the answer is absolutely yes. And the recording will be available later today from the valueselling.com website. So if you go to valueselling.com, resources, webinars, both the recording for today's session will be there, as well as the slides. If you don't want to hear my voice, but you want to see the slides, you can do that as well. In addition, we will also have the registration up for next month's webinar, which I'll share with you that topic in a second. If you want more information and the real detailed how to do this, how do I create the messaging? How do I think like an executive? How do I create an orchestrated, organized, customized approach to gaining access to executives? Call your value selling associate or reach out to valueselling.com. We have two offerings that are absolutely stellar at doing this, and would love to talk with you about how we might be able to add value to your sales organization with either the Vortex prospecting approach or the executive speak program on how to prepare for that executive sales call. So February 15th, please save the date. We're going to be talking about differentiation. In a world where everything is being commoditized and everyone looks and sounds the same, how do we differentiate ourselves in selling scenarios so that we can compete on value, not price? We all know that clients will pay more to get more, but we have to be able to focus on that more And that more is customer specific. And we need to have a process to really uncover what we can be differentiated on. So join me on February 15th, and we'll be talking about differentiation beyond price and really focusing on the value of your differentiation. Please join the conversation. If you haven't found us on LinkedIn, either find me or Value Selling Associates and follow our company. We also have a presence on both Facebook and Twitter. If you are on either of those platforms, please share your thoughts on today's session. We've been live tweeting throughout today and engaging a number of you in that conversation. So would love to continue the dialogue after today's session. And finally, any specific questions, comments, please do not hesitate to call me directly. I do answer my phone. I do respond to emails, and I'm also available on LinkedIn if you find me there. As always, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Finish the first month of 2018 strong, and thank you for taking the time to invest with us and share this past hour with Value Selling Associates. Have a great day.